Welcome to the Organisational Inclusionist. I'm your host, Grace Mosuro. In this podcast series, we'll be delving deep into the pressing issues surrounding equality, diversity, and inclusion in both the workplace and the broader world. My goal is to foster understanding, inspire change, and amplify the voices of those advocating for a more inclusive and equitable society. Throughout this series, I'll be engaging in candid discussions with leaders, experts, activists, and changemakers from various fields. We'll explore the challenges, successes, and evolving landscapes of equality, diversity, and inclusion. From dismantling systematic biases to promoting equal opportunities for all, we'll touch on a broad range of topics. But we won't stop at discussing problems. We'll actively seek out solutions and actionable steps to drive positive change. Our aim is to inspire and empower you, our listeners, to take an active role in making the world a better place for everyone. This is the Organisational Inclusionist. Let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Organisational Inclusionist. My name is Grace Mosuro and I am your host. Today I am joined by Dr Enya Doyle, who is the Harassment Doctor. You'll find out a little bit more about what she does and why she is the Harassment Doctor shortly. But Enya, I'd like to thank you so much for joining today. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Just in terms of some context. So we obviously met on LinkedIn, I think a few months ago, and just had a really powerful conversation about diversity and inclusion and your background in this space. And we ended up talking a lot about why diversity, equality, and inclusion isn't quite ready to die yet, and why there's still a lot of work to be done. So that's that's what the majority of this conversation is going to be about. So it's going to be a great one for sure. But before we get started, I'd love it if you could please introduce yourself to our listeners. So who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr Enya Doyle, the Harassment Doctor. I have been working on social justice for about 15 years now, starting initially in Northern Ireland with reconciliation and peace building work. And then fast forward to 2020 when I completed my PhD. That was on barriers to gender equity in music. So during that time, I started doing a lot of conferences around the world, speaking about inequity, speaking about gender diversity. So I specialise in gender, sex, and sexuality, which is really cool and great. And there's also lots of problems and lots to be done. And so I still find myself referring back to lots of the literature that I used in my PhD, even now. But yes, I've been working as, I probably started calling myself an inclusion consultant about 5 years ago. The work definitely started before then, and I'm sure we'll talk on the phrase EDI quite a lot more over the next wee while. Yes, that's how I ended up here. I also had an in-house director of inclusion role in a school here in London for a couple of years. But I'm just consulting. She says just like it's not overwhelmingly hilarious. But yes, I consult. I do work for myself. I also I'm an associate for a couple of companies too.
Amazing. So what led you to becoming the Harassment Doctor? And for anyone that's not sure what that means, what does that mean for you?
Sure. So the Harassment Doctor largely is born out of what I've seen on the inside of a lot of the companies that I work with, which is that a lot of the time inclusion now is fluffy belonging stuff. Not that belonging is fluffy, it is massive and has massive ramifications when it doesn't happen. But a lot of the companies that I see don't understand the basics. And if we go back to the basics of inclusion, for me, there are bare minimum legal requirements that lots of companies aren't doing. Harassment is one of those places. So harassment in straightforward, simple UK terms is when something is done to either intentionally or has the impact of creating an environment that's harmful. It can impact on your dignity. It's meant to make you feel degraded. It's meant to make you feel worse off. There are lots of words that harassment actually legally means. But ultimately, the harassment piece is you can do the inclusion bit, you can do the belonging bit, you can do it, isn't it nice when we're all nice to each other? the opposite of that is harassment, the opposite of that is discrimination, and so many companies are not doing that then because they don't have the expertise in-house to be doing that then, which means they're not actually meeting their legal requirements. So I thought I'd just try and flip that on its head and say, hey, you need to still do this. You need to do this bit as well as the inclusion and belonging bit.
Absolutely. And how receptive have companies been to your perspective and the way that you approach this?
I think the thing that I have seen is that, like all companies, there are companies that are absolutely not for any of it. And then there are companies that are like, oh, this really is a part of our strategy that we don't have. We don't have people that know this bit. Like we have people with lived experience who can really speak to making people feel safe and feel a sense of belonging. And we kind of see that stream of EDI leads who do important and valuable work. And then you've got the kind of compliance team leads that are like, okay, there is the law and there's nothing else. And then there's this lovely little group of companies, actually quite a lot of companies, particularly across Europe, that are like, okay, can we do both? Like, can we have this harassment expert help us to do this so that we can have employee resource groups, so that we can have safe spaces, so that we can have strategies that matter for people and have all of our company, the entirety of our staff, actually understand how we're supposed to be keeping them safe at work. And I think that jump for a lot of companies is oh, this is the vulnerable bit. This is the bit where we say, we're not perfect and things might happen to you here that we wouldn't want to ever happen to you. But we are now in a place where we're open and honest and we're being really candid with you that it does happen here. It happens everywhere, and we're clear that it happens here. So I'm seeing definitely there is an appetite for it, but there's also a lot of fear.
Mm. No, I love what you've just said there. I think in my work as well, so obviously I work in equality, diversity and inclusion. And in my work, I think one of the things that I see organizations really battling with is being comfortable with just being honest. You know, we aren't where we'd like to be and we know there are issues, but this is what we're going to do to fix it. Or can you help us by letting us know what we need to do to fix it? I think that ownership piece is so human. Um, and yeah, I think that just opens massive doors and hearts, which is so important.
Yeah, and transparency reflects so well. Like it reflects so well on your PR piece. If you even look at it from a PR perspective and you want to only take it in that way, being transparent as a leader, being transparent as a senior leadership team, that builds trust. Even if you don't want to use words like equality, diversity, and inclusion, and you just want to use words that have been in workplace forever, like transparency. Okay, do it because it's the transparent thing to do then.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. Thank you. So obviously when we first spoke, we talked a lot about some of the noise that we're hearing in the UK and in the States predominantly around, you know, diversity and inclusion must die, it's anti-white, kind of weaponization of words like woke. What are your thoughts on all of the noise?
I think noise is such a good way to describe it, especially as a musician. I love the use of the word noise. I think there always has been noise. I think social media amplifies that noise in a way that I don't think we ever could have predicted. I think the noise has always been there because change makers and rebels have also always been here. People have been changing the game for forever. So I
Mm,
think we definitely live in a world where politicians across the world and tech leaders across the world, and I will name none of them because I will do none of them the service to
yeah.
name them, are stoking fires because it seems relevant for them to do it, because it's money making, because there's an audience for it. But it also would be dangerous for us to say that that audience doesn't exist and that that audience
Mm,
isn't self perpetuating all of these things. I was reading this week we've got the mayoral elections, and I was reading the London mayor candidate statements, And actually, I've taken one of the candidates' statements and I'm going to read it for the purposes of this, for anyone that doesn't know. What I'm not going to name the candidate because, again, I'm not interested in stoking their fire. But it says, stand up to woke. Don't divide us. All woke and DEI programmes will be stopped. I will serve all Londoners equally with a colour-blind policy. People will be judged on their character, not skin colour. I will protect religious freedoms, women's sex-based rights, and gay rights. No more identity politics. Our spaces should be for everyone. Running for London Mayor this year, this time round, this month. And the fact that that is a statement on which you can run, and that there is clearly, like, I will be interested to see how many votes that candidate receives from the people of London later this week. But I think being able to say things like that, all woke and DEI programmes will be stopped, that's not within the remit of the London Mayor. And there's a definite noise here that makes people feel like freedom of speech is contrary to inclusion, is contrary to conversations around harassment. Even if this London Mayor candidate were to be elected, they will have to change the law in order for discrimination to be outlawed. The Equality Act is very clearly imbued in law and has been since 2010, before we started using words like woke. It has been our law, and that law didn't then out of nowhere. That is based on laws that have been in our country for a very long time, in our countries for a very long time. So how have we got to a point where people are running on this, where we're kind of regressing to phrases like colourblind policy, where we're using phrases like I will protect religious freedoms, which are protected in law, religion being a really obvious and key protected characteristic. Women's sex-based rights. We can see there's massive hostility in the world currently towards trans rights, but women's sex-based rights are protected in the Equality Act, not because you are running for London Mayor. And I think that definitely in the noise there somewhere is a kind of forgetting. And that's where the harassment doctor comes in. It is currently the law. We are not making things up. This is not a moral code of some people in the UK believe that harassment and discrimination are wrong and some people don't. Okay, that may well be true. Nevertheless, the law says that harassment and discrimination are illegal. So all of these things are protected, and the other mayoral candidates, and I speak with no political affinity, the other mayoral candidates aren't saying the opposite. DEI programmes aren't actually going anywhere.
Yeah, I think what I find, I can't even find the word, but I think what I find frustrating is it's the same kind of rhetoric that was used to sell the country on Brexit. And it's essentially these really empty promises that speak to a proportion of the country that, you know, want to blame someone or something for everything. And I think that it's disappointing, it's dangerous, it's divisive, it lacks legal backing, like you said. But I feel like, I can't remember the name of that candidate, but I know that they've literally had someone advise them that if you run saying this, you know, you've got a really good chance of getting the votes of, you know, people that voted for Brexit who are now like regretting that like crazy, but also the likes of people that support Donald Trump and his ridiculous messaging in the States. So from your perspective then, Enya, why do you think people are so anti-woke and anti-diversity, equality and inclusion?
I think we've always, as humans, needed an enemy, needed something to rally against, need to be on the same team as other people. We're very, very like that as humans. We all need to be part of teams. And we also all love having something to be against. I think people have been missold what this means, the kind of common, it's not pie, it's not I get rights and you don't. I think people have been missold that. And because it feels like that's the case, I think one of the key places that this always plays out, and it plays out, I'm sure, in a lot of the work that you do too, is what about white boys who are from working class backgrounds? That's the absolute key. Comes up all the time. What about the white boys from working class backgrounds? And I'm like, from my perspective as an inclusion and anti-harassment consultant, those boys matter too. But the important word is too. It's not instead of the black boys from working class neighbourhoods. It's not instead of the Muslim boys from working class neighbourhoods. It's in addition to, as well as. And I think when we spend a lot of time saying that white boys from working class neighbourhoods don't matter, or that's what's heard, it's like, well, we matter. And we're like, yes, I agree. Like, if we had this conversation where I say to you, yes, I agree that white boys from working class neighbourhoods matter too, then we don't actually disagree on anything. And then it's not cute for you to hate on me for the work that I do, because we fundamentally don't disagree on the basics here. But when I introduce things like, but you don't face additional barriers because of the colour of your skin, we're talking about you being working class. No, it's not technically a protected characteristic, so we need to be aware of that when it comes to the law. But I hear you. But I can absolutely promise you that the black boys from working class neighbourhoods are not to blame. They are not to blame for your inequalities that you face. That's not who's to blame here. However, phrases like woke, who knows what that means? Don't know, but I'm going to use it anyway. Most people that use the phrase woke don't actually know how it's defined, or the fact that it was initially a positive term that has now been claimed as something that's negative. Most people who say DEI programs wouldn't be able to tell you a definition of equality or equity or the difference between the two of them. It's just another acronym that's used, and we're going to throw it out there to be like, it's them, they're the problem. We're going to put them all in one place, and we're going to call them the problem. Okay, it's the global majority, as in the majority of people on the globe. They're not all to blame, can't be to blame. There's a lot of, one of the key tenets of my consultancy work is that we have all been vastly undereducated in terms of how to care for each other. And I think when it comes down to it, whether it's vastly undereducated because of the media that you consume, where you get your information from, or that when we were all at school, and I count myself in that, wasn't taught any of this, didn't know any of it. I was doing my GCSEs when the Equality Act came in. Like, I wasn't taught any of this. I had to teach myself all of it. That means that everyone who's older than me will also have had the same experience. And then the generation that are being taught it aren't old enough to vote. So we've got most people who have absolutely no idea, have never been taught it, and then the only media that they're consuming is telling them that it's wrong. And they're like, okay, cool, that makes sense. There's lots of really not pleasant things happening around me. The NHS waiting times are really, really long. Trans people must be to blame for that. Oh yes, the less than 1% of the population, definitely to blame for the NHS waiting times in your area. No, they're not. There's got to be something to blame. And thankfully for them, media has put woke EDI agendas as the problem. Objectively not the problem, but they haven't been given the education to be told that it's not the case, that's not actually what's going to solve the problem. And they don't have enough time to interrogate it and be like, okay, let's take this, like, let's take the manifesto for that mayoral candidate in London. Okay, you get into office, you get rid of all woke and DEI programs. Get rid of them all. Somehow you manage to magic a world in London where London is the only place that doesn't have woke DEI programs. You manage to do that. You enforce a colourblind policy. We've got historic knowledge of how that works, buddy. Like, that happened. We've done that bit. That's okay. People will still be legally able to take positive action. That will still be legal in London. So that will still be happening. People will be judged on their character, not their skin colour. That's happened for a long time. We see the FTSE 100 and the FTSE 350. We see how that plays out in terms of who ends up in rooms. Protect religious freedoms. Okay, which ones? Because they contradict. By the nature of religions, lots of parts of religions contradict. Lots of them are based on the same tenets. But you won't be able to protect all religious freedoms equally. Let's enter into the room the word equitable. Oh no, you don't want that. That's going to have to go. Brilliant. Let's do that. Women's sex-based rights and gay rights. Okay, but not bisexual rights and not trans rights. The first time I learned the LGBT acronym, it had the T in it. That's not new. That's not wokery. It's been LGBT for as long as I recall. And then our spaces should be for everyone. That's a really bold statement when you don't want woke and DEI programs to be part of this. Because I'm not welcome then. You're not welcome then, Grace. If our spaces are for everyone, apart from people that do EDI work, which also, lest we forget, is shorthand, and this is the narrative in America particularly, is that DEI is shorthand for black. Not good.
No, at all. At all. I think it's so interesting as well what you said about we're not taught enough how to actually care about each other and care for each other. I saw a video recently on the internet, and it was basically a teacher had put students' names in a balloon, and it was like hundreds of balloons. And he released the balloons from the air, and the students were told that you have 5 minutes to find your name and shout out when you have your name, like hold it up. And obviously within 5 minutes, the students failed. They couldn't find their names in time. So he redid the exercise and said, you now have 5 minutes to give whoever's name you find to the person that it belongs to. And lo and behold, they did that within 5 minutes. And what that exercise really taught them is that if we stop focusing on ourselves and what we want and what we need, and we start to think about other people, we get so much more done and we progress so much more as a people. And seeing that video really gave me goosebumps, because I thought, what an amazing teacher, because he is there doing the work now, teaching the kids how to think beyond themselves. And I completely agree. I think, my generation, your generation and beyond, we lack that education, and we're almost trying to, in the work that we do particularly, we're trying to teach people how to love each other now, in a way that understands that, because of prior experiences and education, we haven't done that historically. So how do we change things going forward? I think in terms of what you said about, people that throw out woke and DE&I and weaponize it, you're right. They don't know what it means. And it's easy to blame those things because they are attributed to Black people, essentially, and to other minority groups. And it then gives them, again, someone to blame. But I think my biggest call to action for anyone listening is we need to start to hold, particularly media, a lot more accountable for what they are sharing and what they are promoting. Because for me, sometimes when I read these things, I think, are you guys just bored? It's almost like things are too quiet. So you just want to make some noise and cause some disruption. And you're right. People reading articles that are kind of promoting this divisiveness and just this mismanagement of the words, they are giving people information that they don't have anything contrary to. So for them, this is gospel, which is why I don't really watch the news, because I don't like what I'm consuming. But yeah, it's really, really scary. I think my biggest call to action is, how do we as individuals hold the media more to account, but also how do we take ownership of our education? Like understanding before developing this venomous view towards D&I initiatives and the term woke. How many of us are actually taking the time to understand what those things mean before we react?
No, for sure. And the thing is, if we were to do that, if we were to consume more than one media, like I remember I no longer have Twitter or its new iteration. But I remember when I was on Twitter that there were a lot of people, there was a period of time where people were like, I'm going to unfollow you because you follow so-and-so person who clearly gives off bad vibes, who is purporting hate. And I saw a lot of that. And one of the things that, rightly or wrongly, I said to myself at the time, I need to know what's happening outside of my echo chamber. I need to know what's happening outside of all of my PhD level qualified people that I'm spending my entire life with. I'm spending my entire time with doctoral students and academics. So I need to know what's happening beyond that. I need to know where hate exists, what rhetoric they're using, what narratives they're using, how they're talking about things. And I need to protect my own safety whilst I do that. And I need to not engage with things that make me feel bad about myself. And I've got to be able to find a way to navigate the world as it is and the world as I want it to be. Because those are two very, very different things. But ultimately, I think if we can consume different perspectives, then that's definitely going in the right direction. I always talk about curiosity. Curiosity is the thing that is the reason that I'm good at what I do. But curiosity is asking questions instead of making statements. When somebody says, "This is what I believe about wokery," okay, tell me more. Like, I'm in a position where I feel safe enough to engage with you on this. I don't feel that I am at mental or physical risk. And that's really important, is that you've got to do that assessment before you walk into these conversations, before you enter into these sorts of conversations. But I spend a lot of my time being like, okay, lay it on me. Like, let's go. Tell me what your problem is. And being curious about it. And at the end of the conversation, they either change their mind or they don't, but they won't leave that conversation saying, "And you did not want my perspective. She did not want to know what I was saying. She wasn't interested in what I had to say. She was curious." If we can be curious about it within that remit of safety, then hopefully that can start going both ways. I'm curious about what you think. You're curious about what I think. Because ultimately, phrases like wokery, acronyms like D, E, and I, in whatever iteration and with whatever series of letters, all of those things help us to take a step away from the fact that the other people on the other side of this are human beings. The humanity of the other side of this is that ED&I is about people. And that's my call to action, is if you forget everything else that we've spoken about on this call, then just remembering that the people on the other side of these EDI initiatives are actual humans. And we have actually taken quite a long time historically to get to the point of seeing all humans as human beings. And we see it in the vitriol against trans people. We see it in the racism. We see it in the homophobia. You can really only do those things if you choose to dehumanize that other person.
Absolutely. That's how slavery succeeded, essentially, dehumanizing Black people as animals. That's the only way that we can, as humans, mistreat each other, I think.
Absolutely.
So from your perspective then, what would you say to anyone thinking of, so they've jumped on, or they're being influenced by this anti-woke and anti-DEI rhetoric, and they're thinking about ending DEI in their organizations? What would your call to action be for those people?
To remember why they started. It's May 2024. We are fast approaching 4 years since George Floyd was murdered. That's at the end of this month. If that's why you started your anti-racism journey, and let's be real, lots of companies did. If that's why you started, then let's remember why you started. You started because a man was murdered because of the color of his skin. That's where you started. Remember why you started. Forget all of the noise. Stay in your own lane. Forget what everyone else is doing. Be led by decency and curiosity, transparency, accountability. You don't need to use D&I if it causes inflammations. Stick to why you started this, and you will remember that this is about people that are hurt, people that cause harm. And then you can do the rest. Forget what else is going on. Forget the noise, as you said, Grace. Forget the noise of everything else that's going on. Remember why you started. And keep that connection to people. Keep the connection to people who need this work. Keep that connection to their opinions, to their perspectives. But ultimately, if you remember why you started, decency and curiosity will follow.
Exactly. And I would completely echo that. I think at some point my connections on LinkedIn are going to get sick of me talking about inclusion strategy and how important it is.
Yeah.
But to me, that's exactly why I make so much noise about it, is your inclusion strategy is your anchor.
Yeah.
That's your why. That's what you should always be going back to when you have moments where you doubt what you're doing, or feel like actually we can get rid of this. Take it right back to the start. Why did you start this, and what were you hoping to achieve? Because that reason, probably in our lifetimes, will never go away,
Mm.
unfortunately. We will move further and further away from where we are, but we've still got so much to do.
Yeah.
So I would just completely echo that, Enya, and I'd encourage anyone thinking about, cutting budgets or just getting rid of it, is just, now's not the time.
No.
It really isn't. If you do need to rename it or redesign it or repackage it, absolutely fine. But remembering your reason and continuing to work towards creating that inclusive change, I think, is so important. And also just remembering that DE&I, if you do it correctly, it benefits everyone.
Yes.
I always talk about the fact that it is really important to listen to everyone's voices in your organizations. And if what you're doing is making the white people in your organization feel like they don't matter, or like they're being excluded, you need to listen to those voices and hear what's missing, because there are ways to fix that. And it's all about hearing everybody's voices and bringing them into the room and into the decisions, but also into creating the change.
Mm-hmm.
People buy into change when they're part of creating and designing that. So
Absolutely, and
that
that's why
is,
allyship is so important. And also, like,
yeah.
we haven't really touched on it, but intersectionality, this isn't just about blacks v whites. This isn't just about race. Race is definitely a part of it, but there are 9 protected characteristics, and you can and should be going beyond the legal protected characteristics. So if this isn't relevant to everyone in your company, then you're not trying hard enough, because it is, all of the protected characteristics are relevant to everyone. And there's also loads of stuff beyond that. I was on a webinar yesterday and we were talking about how people feel about weight, and how they feel about height, and how they feel about long-term leave to do with care. And there are loads of ways that you can make people feel included that aren't, like, menstruation and menopause is an absolutely easy one across the piece. Like, this is not, don't let the narrative be that this is us v you. This benefits you, and if I can convince you that this benefits you, what are we disagreeing on? We're not disagreeing. I want you to be happy at work. I want you to feel like your employer is transparent. I want you to have all of the rights that you so deserve to have. What's the problem? Like, state your problem. Like, if I ask you what your problem is, state it. Let's go. Curiosity. What is your problem? Tell me up front that you're racist. Tell me up front that you're homophobic. Tell me that. Go. No worries. Let's go. Like, because otherwise you're just saying, I don't want other people to have pizza because I want to have all of the pizza. Okay, well, it's not pizza, it's life. It's actual human lives. This isn't pizza, this isn't pie charts, this isn't that little cartoon network of the people watching baseball. That's not what this is. This is actual real humans.
I think even when we look at that analogy, a lot of the time people don't want other people to have pizza that they don't even want.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what's so mind-blowing about some of this, is this is in no way getting in your way. Like, there is no part of this that is stopping you from achieving or is going to take away from you. And I think that's what we need to get rid of. So we talk a lot in the Black community about the scarcity mindset that exists among us, that is attributed to, the slave trade and the inequalities, or the legacies of inequalities from the slave trade.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're even starting to see that scarcity mindset play out with kind of the white community that are anti-DEI progression and initiatives. Is this view that if you get, more than you have had before, I will then get less.
Yeah.
And that's not how it works.
No.
And I think, that would be my biggest call to action. What you said is so powerful, is like, tell me what the problem is. Tell me what you're upset about. I think it's really difficult for people to articulate that, particularly when you ask for it to be evidence-based. So you feel this way, but what evidence do you have that supports that view?
Yeah.
I think if more of us started to ask ourselves those questions, we would really struggle to justify kind of being anti any of this.
Yeah.
A lot of people would just give up because finding evidence feels like work and they just can't be bothered. So it's like, fine, I'll go along with it. And then some people will actually spend the time and be like, well, actually, this, there isn't any evidence that supports kind of the way that I'm feeling. So
yeah, or if there is
evidence,
then as a professional, If you have evidence and we need to fix things, then great. Like, tell me what we need to fix and we'll set about creating strategies and practical actions to fix that. Thank you for telling me. Like, as an anti-harassment, as an inclusion consultant, I want you to feel included. This isn't me versus you. This is us. If you tell me that you're experiencing a problem, give me the opportunity to fix it. Give your boss, give your EDI lead, give your head of HR or people team the opportunity to fix it. Don't say, oh, well, they'll never fix it because they're too busy worrying about racism. Okay, well, they're actually paid to care more about more things than racism, in addition to and including racism, and they should have time and capacity to do that and also what you need. Like, this isn't a you versus me. This is an us thing.
Absolutely. This really is an us thing. And I think that might be the name of this episode podcast. We'll see. So I like to end with kind of a major call to action to anyone that's listening to the episode. I feel like we've given people so many calls to action during the conversation, which is amazing. But if someone was only listening to this last bit of the podcast, what would you want them to hear, Enya?
Focus on humanity. Focus on people being human. The rest will come.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've had a great time. I think we've discussed some things that really need to be discussed, and I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about as well. So just a massive thank you for your time, but also the work that you're doing. It's definitely needed.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Grace.
This podcast is brought to you by Acquaintance Consulting. We'd love it if you could take a minute at the end of this podcast to follow, subscribe, whichever is easier or available for you on the platform that you're listening to us on. We're really keen to grow this channel and really impact equality, diversity and inclusion across the world. And with your support, we can do just that.